It's only 2 days until the 5.5 update, and Hoyo still has not revealed the banner 4 stars. So I'm just gonna make this with the leaked banner 4 stars and hope that they didn't change. Hello. Let's start off with the Phase 1 5 stars. We got our 2 lovely plunging ladies. The newest character, Varesa and Xianyun, on her first rerun. Varesa's entire kit is basically just plunge. Her normal attacks are not useful, but her charge attack launches her in the air and lets her do a plunge. Her skill lets her do a fast charge attack with no stamina cost, which then lets her do a plunge. But after doing a plunging attack, she gets access to a mini burst that costs less energy and has a lower talent scaling. This also does plunging attack damage. Her Night Soul mechanics are also pretty simple. Doing plunging attacks gives her Night Soul. When she's at full Night Soul, she'll buff the next plunging attack she does. Very simple character. She'll sort of be like a Gaming that's easier to play. Her element being Electro makes it so that there aren't really any specific setups you need to do. You can get away with spamming all of her stuff to do a bunch of plunging attacks. She's a run-of-the-mill Natlan DPS, maybe the easiest one to play so far. I think the most notable thing about her is that she's pretty quick swap friendly. Unlike Kanich, Mualani, and Mawika, her damage isn't tied to a state that will end when she swaps off field. Because everything in her kit is just doing one plunging attack, she can easily swap out between attacks and refresh buffs or things like that. If you like her, she's a fairly strong option to go for. If not, she's fairly skippable. The next character we have is Xianyun, the plunge enabler. And let me break the ice here. This is not a Mawika Seatlali situation. Xianyun is a fine support for Varesa, but she's not even gonna be in Varesa's best teams. A lot of Varesa's best teams are looking to be overload teams. Obviously, Xianyun can't fit into them. Anyways, about Xianyun herself, she is a plunge enabler as well as a full party healer. A lot of strong characteristics. She can make most characters into fairly strong on-field DPSs, with the caveat that without Farina, she can be a little underwhelming. A lot of her power is spec'd into her healing potential, so if you're not using that, then she's just meh. She's only a premier buffer for 3 characters, those being Xiao, Diluc, and Gaming. All of our other plunge teams are definitely good enough to clear, but nothing insane. All this to say, she's a character you want to pull if you want more variety on your account. She definitely won't increase the strength of your account by a notable amount, if any, but she can open up a lot of opportunities for other characters. Anyways, let's look at these 4 stars, because this is most likely the strongest 4-star lineup we have ever had on a banner. Now, there have been banners in the past where there are 3 very strong, very relevant 4 stars on them. Raiden has had like 3 of them by herself. But this is the first time that I can remember where there is a banner with 3 powerful 4 stars that have relevant constellations all the way to C6. You are not going to be disappointed with getting a single one of these constellations. We'll go from least to most relevant, starting with Gaming. It's kind of comical to even call him the least relevant because the release of Seatlali has launched Gaming into the stratosphere. At base, he's kind of your average 4-star DPS, not anything crazy, but definitely usable. He's got a lot of problems, but those problems get solved in his constellations. C1 is actually a little more relevant due to iansan's release. Gaming teams are going to go from using Bennett to using iansan, and iansan has significantly less healing than Bennett, so the healing that it gives is going to make Gaming significantly less squishy. C2 is basically an unconditional 20% attack buff. His burst heals him on his activation, and between his A1 passive and his C1, he can always heal himself to full as long as he doesn't get hit. Seatlali's shield makes that pretty achievable. C3 is talent levels to his main source of damage. Nothing special, but a pretty sizable increase to his damage. C4 gives him energy regen. Without this, he can have pretty high energy costs, but with this, they drop considerably. C5 burst levels, definitely not as important as the skill levels, but it's still a fat multiplier on a hit that you're probably gonna melt, so it doesn't hurt. And then C6. Gaming C6 is one of the best constellations in the game, no questions asked. 20% crit rate, 40% crit damage is a total 80 crit value. And he also just gets an AoE increase for some reason. So not only does he get a crazy increase to his damage, but he gets a big quality of life boost. C6 Gaming with Seat Lali surpasses so many C0 5-stars, it's not even funny. No joke, his DPS at this constellation level is pretty much only beaten by Arlecchino and Mawika. And this is the least relevant 4-star on the banner, because while Gaming is fantastic, he can be kind of difficult to play, and he also is an on-fielder, so if you have another on-fielder that you would prefer to play more, his value goes down. Next up is Chevreuse. This is where the relevance thing becomes a bit more wishy-washy, because in a vacuum, I think that Chevreuse is stronger and more flexible than iansan is, but iansan's niche of attack buffing is way less explored than Chevreuse's niche of Res Shred, so even though I consider her more powerful, she's probably less impactful. Along with that, she seems to be getting the Bennett treatment now, where Hoyo throws her on every other banner. I certainly don't have a problem with that, but you're certainly likely to already have a few copies of her. She's the sole enabler of Overload, which is a crazily flexible archetype and is so many units best in slot team, and about 80% of what she does, which is the Res Shred and the full party attack buff, she already does that at C0. Anyways, let's look at her cons. C1 is 6 energy to your active character if they trigger Overload. It's a fine effect, but usually the point of energy generating constellations is the ability to build less energy recharge and more of other relevant stats. But this is a very difficult effect to trigger reliably, and therefore you can't really build around it, so it doesn't do much. C2 is a small personal damage increase. She has fine personal damage if she's built for it, but usually you're gonna go full HP. The more relevant part is that the 2 chain explosions are considered blunt damage and can break Geo and Cryo shields better. C3 is, again, technically an increase to her personal damage, but mostly an increase to her healing. Chevreuse is one of the only healers that I consider talent levels to actually be kind of important on, because without them, her multipliers are a little miserable. With some decent talent investment, she can become a much better, more reliable healer. C4 is kind of like an amped up version of C2. She can do 3 quick skills in a row. The healing doesn't stack, so it doesn't matter for that purpose, but it is a personal damage increase, and more importantly, it lets her front load some pyro application. It's not always useful, but in the situations where it is useful, it's very useful. C5 is only personal damage. There's a lot of teams where Chevreuse doesn't even use her burst, so this is pretty unremarkable. And her C6 is the best by far. While the rest of her constellations tend to be only occasionally useful, her C6 granting a damage bonus to your on-fielder and a full party heal really makes up for how middling C1 to 5 are. The defensive utility of the full party heal and the offensive utility of the damage buff propel Chevy to another level entirely. Chevy is already an incredibly flexible and powerful unit at C0 to 5, and C6 just pushes her over the edge. This constellation genuinely puts her in contention for best unit in the game. Now that I'm done making myself question why I talked about Chevreuse before I talked about iansan, let's talk about iansan. Most of you probably already know what she does. Just in case I have a short video explaining it, let's just look at her constellations. C1 is a refund of 15 energy. Because some of her best gear options are Scroll and Fav, and both of those help her out with energy, it's very rare that she is going to have significant energy needs, but in the few teams where she does, C1 is pretty much going to solve that. She has a special charge attack that's used to activate a buff in her kit, so her C0 rotation is going to be E charge attack Q. C2 changes it so that you can just EQ and get the buff. The more important part is that her burst will grant an extra 30% attack buff. Unlike the buff in her base kit, this is not dependent on her Night Soul points or her attack. It's just 30% attack. It's a fine buff on its own, but it's going to be really impactful for characters who don't move very much and have a harder time keeping up her buff. C3 sucks. Her skill is a fine multiplier, but because you have to build attack percent to increase the value of her buff, you can't build her for damage. C4 gives her 8 Night Soul points when someone else on your team uses a burst. Because she gives a buff that slowly decays over time based on her Night Soul points, 8 extra is pretty significant. Similar to C2, this is going to matter a lot more on characters who have a harder time keeping up her buff. Because her buff scales on how many Night Soul points she has, this is going to allow her to grant a stronger buff for a longer period of time. It also makes it so that if her Night Soul restoration overflows and goes over her cap, she gets to keep 50% of that overflow and use it the next time that she restores Night Soul. Again, this doesn't matter for characters who move a lot and are good at keeping her Night Soul high, but her skill takes her to her maximum Night Soul points, which is 54, and her burst also gives her 15. So she has a little bit of overflow in her kit by default, making C4 even more valuable for characters who aren't good at keeping her Night Soul high. C4 will effectively be 10 to 15 extra Night Soul for those characters. C5 is burst levels. Because her talent level doesn't increase the percentage of attack that she's giving, it only increases the maximum attack that she can grant with her buff. C5 is only going to be useful on her if you can build enough attack to hit that higher cap. C6 is also a fairly strong constellation. First off, it increases the duration of her burst by 3 seconds, which is very significant on its own. And the second half is kind of the opposite of C2 and 4. Every time you overflow on Night Soul, she will buff your character's damage percent by 25% for 3 seconds, which will disproportionately reward the characters who are good at keeping her Night Soul high. So yeah, 3 very relevant 4 stars with relevant constellations all the way down. I know you should never wish for 4 stars, but this might be a situation where you might want to wish for 4 stars. Someone joined my world and asked to do ley lines, so I'm side questing. Iansan is the golden goose here. The ability to have a second attack buffer is invaluable for so many accounts. Unlocking the ability to play 2 attack scaling characters in Abyss is almost enough on its own, but the other 2 4 stars being as powerful as they are makes losing that 1 in 3 chance not feel nearly as bad. And this is for you to decide, but the 5 stars are good enough where it also may not feel too bad getting 1 or 2 copies of them. Me personally, you saw neither my Gaming or my Chevy are C6, so I'll be looking for Khan's and iansan copies on Xianyun's banner. But if I get an early Xianyun without getting an iansan, I'm gonna go on the Varesa banner. I don't really want Varesa, but I'm fine with her, and to me, iansan is worth that risk. Even though we don't have the 4 stars, let's take a moment to look at the Phase 2 banners. Venti is basically irrelevant. I'm gonna be pulling him because I'm insane. He is very much a vanity pull. Unless you just love Venti that much, don't go for him. Xilonen is a bit more worth talking about, but even so, I kind of hesitate to rate her as highly as a lot of other people do. I'll start off with the positive. She's a strong generalist option that is incredibly easy to play, and her healing makes her pretty comfy, and she does a lot to help Geo DPSs. As for other options, she's kind of just fine. While she's a strong option at the moment, I think she is very prone to getting power crept. The only buffs that she brings to a team are the res shred from her skill and the 40% from scroll. Now that we're getting more Natlan units who can hold scroll, the value of her being able to hold scroll is going down. And I mentioned it in my last video, but res shred doesn't stack well. Most enemies have a default 10 to 15% resistance, and any res shred that is applied below 0% gets halved. So any sources of res shred beyond the first in your team get greatly reduced in value. Res shred has historically been a pretty unexplored thing in Genshin. Pretty much only Viridescent Venerer provided res shred, but it has really kicked up in recent years with chevreuse, xilonen, xiiiiii. So as we go into the future, I think Xilonen's main strength isn't going to be the raw numbers that she provides, but rather her ease of use. She res shreds in multi-wave. You don't have to have the correct element on your enemies to get the res shred. You don't need to trigger any sort of reaction. She just does res shred, no questions asked. But xiiiiii has kind of already pushed her out of Mawika teams in some ways, and I expect that she'll get pushed out of other teams in the future, sort of like Kazuha has been. So my advice, don't go for Xilonen because she's the best option in every team, because that is going to change. Go for Xilonen because she's easy to use, because she provides healing, and because she can shred geo resistance. Like Kazuha with his significant personal damage and grouping, I think those are niches that xilonen is not going to get pushed out of anytime soon. Let's quickly talk about the weapon banner. I skipped over it for the first half because those weapons are so specifically tailored to the characters that they're for. Get them if you really like the character or if you really like the look of them. Elegy and Peak Patrol being two pretty strong support weapons that are usable in a lot of different teams are more relevant to think about. How good are they? Occasionally better than Fav, which is about as good as you can say about a support weapon. Genuinely though, team-wide energy generation is such a strong utility, it is really hard to beat Fav. Lower energy requirements means more opportunities to build your characters for other important stats. So Elegy and Peak Patrol providing buffs that are sometimes stronger than that utility of energy generation isn't something to scoff at all, but I really do have to emphasize the occasionally in that sentence. These are not always going to be best in slot weapons. There are many teams where the energy generation is going to be more valuable than the raw stats that these weapons give. But if you're looking to do higher investment stuff on your account, these two weapons are certainly worth looking at. That's it. I had way more to say than I thought I did. This is gonna end up being a fairly chunky video. But if you liked it, you can drop a like or subscribe to let me know. If you have any questions, leave a comment. I'll be happy to answer. And I hope you all have a lovely day.